The night was cold. The wind blew across the hills of France, and a German patrol moved in silence through the outskirts of a village called L'Épinette. They had no reason to expect danger. Behind them, the Wehrmacht had crushed everything in its path. Poland had fallen. Belgium had crumbled. The British Expeditionary Force was retreating toward the sea, broken and bleeding. Victory for the Third Reich seemed inevitable. And then something strange happened. From the top of a tower, a British officer watched the patrol approach. His name was John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill. He was 34 years old. Across his back hung a longbow, at his waist a Scottish broadsword, and in his heart burned a fire that defied all reason. He nocked an arrow, drew the string back, and released. The arrow flew through the air, crossing 30 yards in the blink of an eye. It struck the leading German officer square in the chest. The man crumpled to the ground. Before the rest of the patrol could understand what had happened, gunfire erupted from the British positions, and the ambush was complete. That arrow marked the last confirmed kill by a longbow in modern warfare, and it was only the beginning of the most extraordinary military career of the 20th century. If you are fascinated by stories of impossible bravery and warriors who defied the rules of war, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. You will not want to miss what comes next. John Churchill, or Mad Jack, as he would come to be known, was born on the 16th of September 1906 in Colombo, British Ceylon. His father, Alec Fleming Churchill, worked as a district engineer in the colonial service. His mother, Eleanor Elizabeth, came from a distinguished Irish family with roots in County Cavan. The Churchills were not related to Winston Churchill, despite the famous surname. They were their own breed of British eccentrics, a family that seemed to produce men incapable of living ordinary lives. When Jack was young, the family moved to Hong Kong, where his father served as Director of Public Works. The colony was a world of monsoons and mountains, of colonial order and ancient traditions. It shaped the young boy's imagination. He dreamed of adventure, of distant lands, of battles fought with sword and bow. The family returned to England in 1917, and Jack was sent to King William's College on the Isle of Man. He was not the best student. He was restless, impatient, drawn to physical pursuits rather than academic ones. But he possessed something that could not be taught, a fearlessness that bordered on recklessness, a belief that limits existed only to be broken. After graduating from the Royal Military College at Sandhurst in 1926, Churchill was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment. He was sent to Burma, then part of the British Empire, to complete his training. It was there, in the heat and humidity of Southeast Asia, that his legend began to take shape. Burma was a land of rivers and jungles, of ancient temples and forgotten kingdoms. Churchill loved it. He spent his free time exploring on a Zenith motorcycle, racing down unpaved roads and railroad tracks. One story tells of him riding 1,500 miles from Pune, India, to Rangoon, balancing his motorcycle on railroad ties while listening for the sound of approaching trains. He crashed into a water buffalo along the way. He got up and kept going. It was also in Burma that he learned to play the bagpipes. The Cameron Highlanders were stationed nearby, and their pipe major agreed to teach the young English officer. Churchill proved to be a quick learner. The haunting wail of the pipe spoke to something deep within him. It was the sound of defiance, the sound of Scotland's ancient warriors marching to battle. He would carry those pipes with him for the rest of his military career. By the mid-1930s, peacetime soldiering had begun to bore him. The British Empire was at peace. There were no battles to fight, no adventures to be had. In 1936, after 10 years of service, Churchill resigned his commission. What followed was a period of wandering. He worked as a newspaper editor in Nairobi, Kenya. His chiseled features and athletic build caught the attention of photographers, and he picked up work as a male model. He even found his way to Hollywood, where he took a small role in the 1940 film The Thief of Baghdad, advising on archery techniques and demonstrating his remarkable skill with the longbow. That skill was genuine. Churchill had been practicing archery since his youth, and by the late 1930s, he was one of the finest archers in Britain. In 1939, he represented Great Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo, Norway. He finished 26th out of a competitive field, shooting arrows at distances up to 200 yards with remarkable accuracy. But the world was changing. In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war, and John Churchill immediately requested reinstatement in the army. He was assigned once again to the Manchester Regiment and sent to France as part of the British Expeditionary Force. He brought with him his longbow, his broadsword, and his bagpipes. His fellow officers thought he was mad. They were not wrong. The German Blitzkrieg struck in May 1940. Panzer divisions sliced through the Ardennes, outflanking the Allied defenses. The British and French armies fell into chaos. Within weeks, the entire British Expeditionary Force was trapped against the coast, surrounded at the small port town of Dunkirk. It was during the retreat to Dunkirk that Churchill first made his mark. As his unit fought a series of rearguard actions against the advancing Germans, he practiced guerrilla tactics, staging raids and ambushes to slow the enemy advance. His bravery earned him commendations. He survived a clipping by machine gun fire. And then came the moment at Lepinette. The village was occupied by German forces. Churchill and a small detachment were ordered to hold a position overlooking the town. When a German patrol approached, Churchill did not reach for his rifle. He reached for his longbow. The arrow that killed the German sergeant was barbed, designed for hunting. It was a weapon from another age. And it worked. There is some debate about this story. In later years, Churchill himself mentioned that his bows had been crushed by a lorry earlier in the campaign. But whether the longbow kill happened exactly as legend tells it, or whether it occurred in a slightly different form, one thing is certain. John Churchill believed in the power of ancient weapons. He carried them into battle, and he used them. After Dunkirk, Churchill volunteered for the newly formed British Commandos. These elite units were Winston Churchill's answer to the German Special Forces. They specialized in raids, sabotage, and unconventional warfare. They were looking for men who could think creatively, fight aggressively, and lead from the front. John Churchill was exactly what they needed. He was assigned a No. 2 Commando and quickly rose to a position of leadership. His reputation for bravery was already established. But it was in the commandos that he found his true calling. The first major test came on the 27th of December, 1941, Operation Archery. The target was Vågsøy, a small island off the coast of Norway, where the Germans had established a garrison to protect a strategically important fish oil factory. Churchill was second in command of No. 3 Commando for this raid. As the landing craft approached the shore, the ramps dropped, and the assault began. And there, at the front of his men, stood John Churchill. He was not carrying a rifle. He was playing the bagpipes. The tune was March of the Cameron Men, a traditional Scottish song of war. The sound echoed across the frozen water as the commandos charged forward. Then Churchill dropped the pipes, pulled a grenade, and hurled it at the German positions. He drew his broadsword and led the charge. The garrison fell in less than 10 minutes. Every German soldier was killed or captured. It was a stunning victory, and it confirmed what many had suspected. John Churchill was not merely brave. He was something else entirely, a warrior from another time, somehow transported to the battlefields of the 20th century. For his actions at Vågsøy, Churchill received the Military Cross and Bar. But he was only getting started. By 1942, Churchill had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of No. 2 Commando. He was now responsible for training and leading one of the most elite units in the British military. He took the job seriously. But he never lost his sense of style. His men knew what to expect from him. Before every operation, Churchill would appear with his broadsword, his longbow, and his bagpipes. "In my opinion," he once said, "any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." It was not a joke. He meant it. July 1943, Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. Churchill led No. 2 Commando from their landing site at Catania, carrying his full medieval kit. The sight of him must have been extraordinary. A British officer in the 20th century marching into battle against tanks and machine guns with a sword at his hip and a bow across his back. But Sicily was just the beginning. In September, the Allies launched Operation Avalanche, the amphibious assault on mainland Italy at Salerno. The Germans were prepared. The landing beaches were heavily defended. The entire operation was in danger of collapse. Churchill's commandos were ordered to capture a German observation post outside the town of Molina. This post controlled a mountain pass leading down to the Salerno beachhead. As long as the Germans held it, they could direct artillery fire onto the Allied positions below. What Churchill did next became the stuff of legend. Under cover of darkness, he and a single corporal infiltrated the town. They moved silently through the streets, avoiding German patrols. When they reached the observation post, Churchill did not call for reinforcements. He drew his broadsword and attacked. The Germans were caught completely off guard. One by one, Churchill and his corporal moved from position to position, surprising the enemy and demanding their surrender. By the time the night was over, they had captured 42 German soldiers, including an entire mortar squad. Churchill marched his prisoners back down the mountain pass. The wounded were carried on carts, pushed by the German prisoners themselves. Churchill later said the scene reminded him of an image from the Napoleonic Wars. It was his kind of war. For this action, Churchill was recommended for the Victoria Cross, the highest award for valor in the British military. The recommendation was downgraded to a Distinguished Service Order. Some who were there believed the Victoria Cross would have been deserved. But Churchill did not fight for medals. He fought because fighting was what he was born to do. If you are enjoying this story of one of history's most remarkable soldiers, take a moment to like this video and share it with anyone who loves military history. These small actions help bring stories like this to more people. The Italian campaign continued through the winter and into 1944. Churchill remained at the front, leading raids and engaging the enemy with his characteristic audacity. But by early '44, a new opportunity presented itself. The Allies were supporting Josip Broz Tito's partisan forces in Yugoslavia. Tito's guerrillas were fighting a brutal war against the German occupation, tying down enemy divisions that might otherwise be sent to other fronts. Churchill was assigned to the McLean Mission, a special operations group working with the partisans from the Adriatic island of Vis. In May 1944, Churchill was ordered to lead a raid on the German-held island of Brach. He assembled what he called a motley army of 1,500 partisans, No. 43 Commando, and one troop from No. 40 Commando. It was a mixed force, inexperienced and poorly coordinated. But Churchill was confident. The landing was unopposed. The Germans had not detected the approach, but as the assault force moved inland, they encountered heavily fortified gun emplacements. The partisans, seeing the strength of the German positions, decided to wait until the following morning to attack. Churchill was not pleased, but he agreed to the delay. That night his commandos prepared for the assault. Churchill played his bagpipes to signal readiness. The next morning the attack began. No. 43. Commando launched a flanking assault while Churchill led the elements from No. 40 Commando directly against the German positions. It went wrong almost immediately. The partisans refused to advance. Remaining at the landing area, Churchill's small force pushed forward alone. German machine gun fire tore into the ranks. Mortar shells exploded among them. One by one, the commandos fell. By the time Churchill reached his objective, only 7 men were left. Then a mortar shell landed among them. The explosion killed or wounded everyone except Churchill himself. He was alone, surrounded by Germans. His ammunition was exhausted. His men were gone. And what did John Churchill do? He pulled out his bagpipes and began to play. The tune was, "Will Ye No Come Back Again?" It was a Scottish lament, a song of farewell. He played it as the Germans advanced, knowing that his fight was over. A grenade exploded near him, and he was knocked unconscious. When Churchill woke, he was a prisoner. The Germans had found identification on him that showed his surname was Churchill. They assumed, incorrectly, that he must be related to Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. This made him a valuable prisoner. He was flown to Berlin for interrogation. Churchill was eventually sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, located just north of Berlin. It was one of the most brutal camps in the Nazi system, a place designed to break the strongest wills. Political prisoners, resistance fighters, and special captives were held there under conditions of extreme cruelty. But John Churchill had no intention of remaining a prisoner. In September 1944, just a few months after his capture, Churchill and a Royal Air Force officer named Bertram James organized an escape. They had discovered an abandoned drain beneath the camp and spent weeks tunneling through it, extending the passage until it emerged beyond the barbed wire. One night they crawled through the drain and escaped into the darkness. They made their way toward the Baltic coast, hoping to find a boat that would take them to neutral Sweden. They almost made it. But after traveling for days on foot, evading German patrols and surviving on whatever food they could scavenge, they were recaptured just short of their destination. Churchill was placed in solitary confinement and then transferred to a more secure camp at Niederdorf in the Austrian Tyrol. This was a special camp for high-value prisoners guarded by SS troops and the Death's Head Unit, one of the most feared organizations in the German military. The prisoners included politicians, military officers, and other prominent figures that the Nazis planned to use as bargaining chips. As the war entered its final months, conditions in the camp grew tense. The prisoners began to fear that they would be executed before liberation could arrive. A delegation of inmates approached German army officers to express their concerns. The Wehrmacht, which had its own tensions with the SS, agreed to intervene. In late April 1945, a German army unit commanded by Captain Wichard von Alvensleben moved in to protect the prisoners. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the SS guards withdrew. The prisoners were left under Wehrmacht protection. But Churchill was not content to wait for liberation. One evening, taking advantage of a power failure that plunged the camp into darkness, he slipped away into the forest and headed toward the Alps. What followed was an epic journey of survival. Churchill walked through the mountains, covering nearly 100 miles on foot. He had a busted ankle. He had no supplies. He moved at night and hid during the day, evading German patrols that were still active in the area. 8 days later, he stumbled upon an American reconnaissance unit near the Brenner Pass. He was exhausted, injured, and half-starved, but he was free. The war in Europe ended a few weeks later, in May 1945. For most soldiers, this would have been the end of the story. Time to go home, to rebuild, to forget the horrors of war. But John Churchill was not like most soldiers. When he heard the news of Germany's surrender, he was reportedly disappointed. According to fellow soldiers, he exclaimed, "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. It was a joke, of course, or maybe only partly a joke. Churchill lived for combat. He thrived in the chaos and danger of battle. Peace for him was boring. The war in the Pacific was still raging, and Churchill immediately requested a transfer. He wanted to fight the Japanese. He trained as a paratrooper and prepared to join the assault on the Japanese home islands. But then came August 1945. The atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The war was over everywhere. Churchill was stranded without a war, but he quickly found another. In 1948, he was assigned to British-occupied Palestine, where tensions between Jews and Arabs were exploding into violence. The British were trying to maintain order while preparing to withdraw, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. On the 13th of April, 1948, a medical convoy traveling to Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus was ambushed by Arab forces. The convoy contained doctors, nurses, and patients. For hours, they were trapped under fire while British authorities failed to respond effectively. Churchill was on the scene. With only 12 men, he attempted to intervene. He offered to evacuate the civilians, but his offer was refused by the convoy's defenders, who feared it was a trap. When no reinforcements arrived, Churchill and his small force provided covering fire and tried to help however they could. It was not enough. 78 people were eliminated in what became known as the Hadassah Medical Convoy Massacre. It was one of the darkest moments of the conflict. Churchill remained in Palestine, working to protect civilians and evacuate those in danger. He personally helped rescue an estimated 700 Jewish doctors, students, and patients from Hebrew University. His military career continued for another decade. He served as an instructor at a land-air warfare school in Australia. He qualified as a parachutist multiple times over. He sought out any opportunity for adventure and danger. But perhaps the most unexpected chapter of his post-war life was his discovery of surfing. In Australia, Churchill encountered the sport and immediately fell in love with it. He began designing and building his own surfboards, experimenting with different shapes and materials. He became one of the first people to surf the tidal bore of the River Severn in England, riding the powerful wave that rushes up the river during certain tides. It was a fitting hobby for a man who had spent his life chasing waves of a different kind. Churchill retired from the British Army in 1959. He had served for more than 3 decades, fought in multiple wars, escaped from prisoner of war camps, and accumulated a collection of medals that most soldiers could only dream of. He held the Distinguished Service Order and Bar, the Military Cross and Bar, recognition from multiple nations for his service. In retirement, he lived quietly in Surrey, England. He developed a passion for steam-powered boats and spent countless hours sailing coal-fired vessels on the Thames between Richmond and Oxford. He built radio-controlled model warships, recreating the battles of his youth in miniature. His son Malcolm later recalled that his father never bragged about his wartime exploits. He didn't brag about these things at all, Malcolm said, but he would be happy to talk to anyone who asked, particularly if it was over a couple of nice glasses of wine in the evening. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill passed away on the 8th of March, 1996. He was 89 years old. So what do we make of Mad Jack Churchill? How do we understand a man who carried a longbow and broadsword into a war fought with tanks and machine guns? Some would say he was reckless, that his tactics were suicidal, that he survived only through luck, and that his example should not be followed. And there is truth to that. Churchill took risks that would have gotten most men eliminated. He charged machine gun nests with a sword. He played bagpipes while under fire. He escaped from concentration camps and walked across the Alps with a broken ankle. By any rational calculation, he should have been eliminated a dozen times over. But there is another way to look at it. John Churchill understood something that many forget. War is not just about firepower. It is about psychology, about fear, about the will to fight. When Churchill played his bagpipes and charged with his sword, he was not just attacking the enemy's bodies. He was attacking their minds. He was showing them something they had never seen before, something they could not understand. And that confusion, that moment of hesitation, gave him the edge he needed. His men loved him for it. They followed him into impossible situations because they believed in him. They saw a leader who was willing to put himself in the greatest danger, who led from the front, who never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. That kind of leadership inspires men to do things they never thought possible. Churchill also reminded his era of something important, that the values of the past were not obsolete, that courage, honor, and personal bravery still mattered, that a man with a sword could still make a difference in a world of machines. In March 2014, the Royal Norwegian Explorers Club published a book naming John Churchill as one of the finest explorers and adventurers of all time. It was a fitting tribute. He was not just a soldier. He was an explorer of the limits of human possibility. The world has changed since Churchill's time. Wars are fought with drones and satellites, with missiles that strike from over the horizon. The idea of a man charging into battle with a sword seems almost quaint now. But the qualities that made Churchill great have not changed. Courage, creativity, the willingness to do what others think impossible, the refusal to accept limits imposed by convention. These are the qualities that win wars. These are the qualities that change history. And these are the qualities that we should remember when we think of John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, the soldier who brought a medieval bow to World War II and never lost a battle. Thank you for watching this story of one of history's most extraordinary warriors. If this video inspired you, take a moment to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling us what other historical figures you would like us to cover. Your support helps bring these incredible stories to life. Until next time, remember the words of Mad Jack himself. In my opinion, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. Sometimes the old ways still have something to teach us.